Hey everyone! So I'm going to cover the game between Fabiano Caruana and Hikaru Nakamura from round one of the Candidates Tournament. So I'm just going to jump straight into it. Caruana started with 1e4, Nakamura replied with 1e5, so no Sicilians, nothing crazy. Knight f3, knight c6, and bishop e5, and we reach a very, very well-known, very deeply analyzed position here. There have been like tens of thousands of games here with all the top players involved. And Nakamura chooses to go for the Berlin. Of course, the main line is a6, and then you enter normal Roy Lopez territory. So Nakamura chose knight f6, and Caruana declined to go into the main lines with castles. Instead, he played here d3, and Nakamura replied with bishop c5, and we'll see how this bishop actually, in a way, will get kicked around a bit. White chooses to take. Of course, you don't have to play like this. In other games, the normal follow-up is just c3. Some people even decide to castle. But Caruana decided to take on c6, and now d takes, knight bd2, and now bishop e6. And here, Caruana chose to castle. There are other moves people have tested out, knight b3 in the past. And after bishop e6, the game goes on. Basically, black will try to keep a hold of this bishop on this diagonal to have some sort of pressure on f2 at some point. Instead of that, Caruana just castled and withheld knight b3 for the moment. Bishop d6, so in a way preempting knight b3, but putting it on the d6 square instead of the b6 square. Knight b3 anyways, and this has been seen before in a few games, not too many. And the idea is that this knight is going to eventually come around this way and start attacking the queen side. So black continues the queen e7 and knight a5. Now, you don't actually even have to play queen e7 here. There were other games that were played, for example, in an Aronian Dominguez game. It went like this, a5, where basically black tried to kick the knight immediately from its outpost, so queen e1 was played to just immediately hassle the pawn. The knight was kicked, and the knight comes to a5. Queen b8 was played to cover the b7 square, and then b4. And the game went into very sharp territory, and eventually it got a bit complicated. And I believe that Aronian won, or let me just do a double check before I make a mistake here. No, Dominguez won, actually. But anyways, there's also another way to play this, which is instead of actually going queen e7, you can just play castles here, and the position goes into a sort of normal territory. This is a game between Rajabov and Wesley So, where Wesley So played as white. So knight a5 again, same idea. And here they got normal position, and eventually Rajabov actually won a very nice game. But of course, you don't have to play like this. Nakamura instead opted to play queen e7, which makes sense because it leaves the option of castling queenside at some moment. So knight a5 anyways. Now again, if you play b6 here, knight c6 is simply winning. So you can't do that. So black has to really make a decision here at like, how do you defend the b pawn? You could either castle queenside, or you could play rook b8. Nakamura chose to play rook b8. And this is a new move. Prior to this, there have been alongside castles was basically the move here. This is a game between, I think, Ray Robson and Dominguez as well. Dominguez really likes playing this opening. So castles, and Robson didn't really handle the position correctly. He kind of made this mistake of exchanging everything on f3, and White's attacking chances on the queen side just kind of went into the trash bin. So that didn't go well. So I think Nakamura knew about this and played rook b8 instead, realizing that maybe he wanted to be a little bit more ambitious and not commit his king to the queen side. But this does come with a drawback, which is bishop g5. So this immediately sets up a very annoying pin, and black basically has to create weaknesses to get rid of this pin, which is what Nakamura did. He played h6, and then bishop h4, and now g5. Now, if, instead of h6 here, if black were to just castle, then a move like queen c1 is kind of annoying. And this is, of course, a computer line, but the idea is that you would play bishop d7 to play queen e6 and step out of the pin like that. But this is pretty slow, and white comes in with d4 here. And this can't really be taken, because after takes, you run into e5, which just wins a piece on the spot. Because after bishop takes, you can play rook e1, and there's no way to actually save the piece. So that's why I think Nakamura chose to just remove the pin immediately with g5. And bishop g3. But now he has kind of a very serious dilemma here, which is if he castles kingside, he has very annoying weaknesses around his king, especially since he pushed this h and g pawn. So that's one thing. The other thing is he also has to defend the e pawn. So that's why he plays knight d7 here. d4 anyways. This was not taken because it would just give white unnecessary activity. White can eventually take the bishop, or even think about it some moment playing f4 here, and because the e-pawn isn't here, f4 just becomes that much stronger. So I don't think that he would have wanted to do this. For example, after bishop takes g3, h takes castles. Basically, there are lots of ideas where white can start trying to aim for f4 and break down this kingside structure here. So that's no good. So Nakamura played f6 just to hold the pawn for the moment. Queen d3, and now h5. And Nakamura really just has to go for it, because if he doesn't, then his weaknesses will be very serious. So d takes, knight takes, a few exchanges. And here, Caruana played knight c4. Basically, he's going to pick up one of these bishops, either the dark squared one, or if the light squared one decides to exchange itself. So the bishop pair is really just irrelevant here. So rook d8, and now he just took the bishop, and c takes. Now, again, if rook takes, then queen c3 and the e5 pawn is just completely gone. There's no way to save it. So that's why pawn takes is necessary. And now, a great move by Caruana, queen e3. This is a really good move. Just basically stepping out of the line of the rook, so d5 won't be as dangerous. In a way, the queen is also x-raying e5. It attacks g5 and it eyes up the queen side as well. So just a really solid move. g4, this is the only thing that Nakamura can do to save the pawn. Knight d2, and now a6, just to keep the pawn. You know, you don't want to lose it. I don't think he would want to go like this, because it just creates another weakness, and these two pawns are pretty weak. It's really shaky on the queen side. So a6 makes sense. And now b3, a pretty strange move, but it does have a purpose. At some point, white would want to play c4, but the other idea is that also, in some variations we'll see in the future, the c4 square is actually available for this bishop, so covering it is pretty important, and I'll get to that in a little bit. So Hikaru here castled. Now, I want to go back for a little bit, because here I was looking at this and I was thinking, like, to myself, okay, well, why not just go king d7, run the king somewhere, connect the rooks, and maybe start something on the white king. Seems like a very valid plan. Unfortunately, this doesn't really work. Okay, so if we try king d7 now, a move that might look scary is queen a7. But this doesn't really lead anywhere, because after king c7, let's say knight c4 to threaten queen b6, it doesn't go anywhere at all. And queen c7 just basically forces the exchange of queens, and black is actually much better there. So this attack on the black king is not working. Okay, so maybe instead of queen a7, there's something better. And I think this is why Nakamura decided to not do this. I think the move b4 here is actually really strong. The idea is pretty simple, to just push the a pawn, play b5, and start ripping open the queen side. And if at any moment black ever takes this pawn like this, the a file starts opening up, and the queen in coordination with the rook would actually become very strong. So for example, if we just keep playing h4, right? a4, h3, g3, and the king side's closed. Rook hf8, and this is of course a computer variation, and now b5. And this is actually really unclear, because the king is actually stranded in the middle, and playing here might be a little bit scary, because after this, the rook might come in, and this is looking a little bit scary, with the queen very well placed on e3 to go to a7. it doesn't really look ideal. In fact, I actually think that you can't even take this because queen a7 I think just wins, like on the spot, and you just take the queen. So this is actually a very scary position to play, and it's not simple at all. Okay, so instead of this, what if we just try, instead of h4, what if we just try king c8? So instead of h4, we play king c8 just to cover the king immediately, maybe step out of this issue completely. a4, again, it's just a very strong move. And after something like king b8, b5, and you would have to close the position down, but after taking, the rook comes in, and it's not clear at all like what is going on the queen side. Black can, for a moment, maybe cover himself with like king a7. But it's not obvious because the knight will come in, maybe the queen will reroute to attack a6 at some point, maybe a5. This is a very scary position to play as black, and actually the white king is completely secure. Black's attack is just way too slow on the king side here. So I think that's one of the reasons why this is not a good move immediately. So let's go back to this position here. So instead of king d7, what if black just tries to play a move like h4? First, basically withholding the fact that king d7 is possible. You know, it's possible maybe in the future, but not right now. Well, okay, the game can go like this, and this is a little bit different because now when the king runs and after b4, actually this works, and there's a reason for that. It's because of bishop c4, and this is why playing b3 was very important. So, and it's also why knight takes is actually not ideal, I believe. It's, of course, the best engine move, but it sort of takes away white's plans of playing b4, a4, and then b5, because the knight no longer covers c4. So it's not exactly ideal for white. And it's just a very interesting variation to see here, is that actually this attack doesn't work because bishop c4 is a resource. And I think Caruana probably had the hindsight, or like the vision to actually understand that maybe b3 would cover this vital square here. If that doesn't work, okay, what if instead of knight takes, what if just rook takes? Seems reasonable. And let's try this evacuation plan again. And again, black has this great resource, d5, and basically now the black pieces are coming alive. They hit the rook. This h-pawn is actually a thorn in white's king side. The rooks are connected, and the king is actually pretty secure. It's not clear how white might break through, because white himself might be under attack here. Like, he can try a b5 at some point, but black's attack might just come a lot quicker because of this very powerful light squared bishop. So that's an interesting variation. But instead, Nakamura decided to, instead of play king d7 or h4, he decided to just castle immediately. But doing this is very risky because there's basically this giant vacuum of space around the black king, and these pawns are actually going to prove as weaknesses. If you look at white's king, white has all his pawns in front of his king, and they're all very safe, so white is very secure here. There's no real threat on white's king at all. Caruana decides to start breaking down the king side structure. Queen g7, takes. And now just rook d1, basically just eyeing up this pawn, and also just connecting the rooks, putting the rook on a useful square. And Nakamura here decided to play d5. If takes, I think actually knight takes might be a good move, because the knight might come into g3, and the rook suddenly looks at d6, and the queen can still come to a7 at some point, can come to b6 at some point. It's just not a very clear position for how black is going to proceed. This e-pawn is still a problem. We'll see that in the game, though. So instead, after rook d1, d5 was played, and the center doesn't hold. I think Nakamura here was sort of in a panic because he couldn't do anything on the king side. If something like g3 came, you could just pick that pawn off. It doesn't really do anything. There's really no attack on white's king. Exchanging rooks like we saw doesn't work. And I think that he saw that nothing could really happen on the queen side because of just how solid white is. So I think that's why he decided to play d5 here. But this was really not a great decision because his center collapsed immediately. After takes, basically rook de1. And again, if this rook is taken, the knight just takes, and there's still pressure on the e-pawn. So e4 was played to basically hold this pawn. It's very hard to defend it otherwise. If something like rook f5, you can just take, and then you can take this. The pawn collapses, so he had to push it. And now Caruana simply exchanged, removing even the idea of exchanging on f1, and then he played c4, which is an amazing move. Basically, a very instructive move. He just kind of just destroys black's center and makes this a weakness. This is very clearly a weakness, and his bishop is kind of scrambling to defend all the pawns. This queen is also not very well. I mean, it's placed in an okay way, but this pawn is weak, and the queen has an important task of defending the black king. White, on the other hand, doesn't really have any serious weaknesses, so and black just doesn't have any attacking chances here. So takes on d5, bishop takes, and now this another great move, knight f1. I mean, how many of us would really play knight f1 here? I mean, it might look obvious to some of you, whoever is like pretty decent player. But it's not obvious why this is amazing. I mean, this knight is actually not doing anything anymore. And just to understand that knight f1, just to come into e3, or at some point maybe even g3, and suddenly the knight will actually look at these very important squares, is just really, it's just a great move. So queen e5, and this immediately, because the queen moved, white finally has this chance to enter the position with queen h6. And the knight, as you can see, has a free square to go to, which will hit the bishop, look at f5, look at g4, and the knight will be an amazing blockader. Black can't even push this, by the way. This just gets completely taken. Or, like, knight takes. Either way, it's just a disaster for black. So, queen g7, Nakamura tries to exchange queens, and of course, you shouldn't exchange queens in this position. Queen d6 hits the bishop. The bishop comes back to c6. It guards the rook, also guards the pawn. Guards the queen side as well. So for the moment, black is actually holding things, but black has permanent weaknesses. His king is just completely weak. There's nothing that can really touch the white king. I mean, queen e5 check is not a move. E3 is never a threat. And after knight e3, basically this pawn is just going to be too weak to hold at some point. White might just come back with queen g3 and start trying to pick it off. So Nakamura decided to just concede and play g3 immediately. H takes, and again, queen takes. You really don't want to enter this endgame because actually black might have chances to hold. Like, yes, you're a pawn up, but this double pawn structure might mean nothing in an endgame. So that's why H takes instead of queen takes. Queen e5, Nakamura again insists on an exchange of queens. Queen g6 check, queen g7, queen g6, and it seems like they're just bouncing around, not much progress is being made. The g-pawn gets picked up, and now another great move here. Basically, the queen is guarding the knight. It's the perfect square. The knight is a blockader, and the rook has served its purpose defending the knight, so it just moves to the next open file that it can take, which is the f file. And again, the weakness of black's king is just becoming more and more obvious as each move progresses. So queen h4, basically eyeing up this pawn. Also in a way maybe indicating that knight f5 is coming. Queen h7, check. And they bounce around for a little bit, and Caruana puts his rook on the d file because the bishop is moved. If something like bishop c6, I think basically the rook will enter the game somehow, maybe rook d6, I think. So bishop e6, knight here. Now you really don't want to take this, because if this is taken, then rook takes, and suddenly the rook will enter the game, and there's just no way to really stop rook g5. The king will be cut apart. It doesn't matter that the material is equal. This king is very weak, while this king is actually completely safe. And again, no checks are available. This is not harmful. Like, this doesn't do anything because you just go back, and black is out of checks. And rook g5 is still coming. This queen is still menacing. Black can't do anything here. So rook f8. The pawn is just swiped. Queen h6. And rook e1. Now, if this is taken, again, this is just fine, because the black king is going to get pushed around and the rook will enter the game. Maybe rook e6, maybe rook e7, depending on what black does. So that's not ideal. A little trick here, of course, if this is taken, this is a winning endgame for a computer, but converting a rook and a pawn endgame like this is really annoying to do. in a classical setting. So I think Caruana just decided I'm not dealing with this, and he accurately played knight e7. After king f7, knight f5. Again, all these exchanges, like anything that, if there's any exchanges, king is just way too exposed. There will be some sort of counterplay here. In fact, maybe even after taking, I mean, there might even be just this move. So, I mean, the rook just gets picked up. So that's not possible. Queen f6 is played. And now this very calm move, rook f1, just basically asking the queen, like, okay, you're on f6. I mean, I'm ready to just capture you. Like, you'll just be taken next turn if you don't do anything. Bishop d5, check. And now you obviously can't take this because this will be taken, so there's another check. And here I believe Nakamura resigned. And why? Because after knight f5, there's really nowhere for the king to go. If he goes to f7, then knight h4 just wins because this is going to be taken. If he goes to h7, then queen h4, and basically the king is running out of places to go. And then the rook is captured, and that's it. GG. So a really convincing game by Caruana. I think Nakamura went kind of astray. Well, actually, in the beginning, when he played here rook b8 on move 9, I think this was actually the start of his problems, because queen e7 clearly intends to castle queenside. And that would have been a game. And it's been tested before, and black actually has 2 games here and won both of them based on this database right here. I think in ChessBase it's the same thing. But instead, I mean, I think he really went astray playing rook b8, because I think he just underestimated just how weak his king would become after bishop g5. And maybe he should have tried to at least move the bishop and then play queen e6 to at least step out of this pin in a different way, but that's not Nakamura's style. That's just not how he plays chess. And again, doing this just creates like this massive weakness on the king's side, and the king is basically stranded. I mean, if you're playing a Sicilian, like a classical Sicilian, like you could probably get away with keeping your king in the center, but when the position is like this, where there are, it's still like white still has a lot of resources. And the white king is completely safe. It's not really a great idea to do this, especially because his bishop is it would kind of want to be on g7 in some cases, and maybe then I would want to be somewhere else. It's just not a great setup for black, and I think it just really went wrong because white just gained control very slowly, and just exploited all of black's weaknesses. Queen e3 was a great move. Basically forcing black to, again, push further. And I think the last straw was where Nakamura decided to castle kingside. I think he should have held off on that for a little bit and maybe push the h-pawn, maybe run his king across. And yes, it would get very complicated with whatever's going on the queen side, but I think at least it would have created a sharper game where Nakamura would have probably had some better chances to either hold or even win. Because black's, if the rooks are connected, and there's still a king to attack here, black still has chances, but here Nakamura just kind of folded and he just gave his king to white, and white just slowly picked apart everything and just won decisively. And again, d5 is just a sign that, I mean, after d5 the center collapsed and there was really nothing that Hikaru can do to save this position. But overall, really great game by Caruana. If you haven't seen the first video, take a look at it. I'll be covering round 2 pretty soon. And I'll be covering all the games in the candidates that are decisive. Even if it's like 4 games per round, it's a pretty ambitious goal. But if it's 4 games per round that are won, which is unlikely to happen, I will cover probably maybe 1 or 2 that are really good. But anyways, thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. See you later. Bye.